What is wealth, really? Is it the zeros in your bank account, the car you drive, the table you command at an exclusive restaurant? Or is it something deeper, something that money can't touch? In the heart of Chicago, at a restaurant where the elite gather to display their success, a young waiter was about to teach a millionaire a lesson in what real riches look like. When Carson Fielding dismissed him with a wave and a sneer, asking, "Do you even know how to serve someone like me?" He expected submission. What he got instead was wisdom that would silence a room and change a culture. Because sometimes the person serving your meal understands more about life than you ever will. If you're ready for a story about what truly matters, hit that subscribe button, because this is exactly the kind of truth we're here to share. The Gilded Fork sat on Michigan Avenue like a crown jewel, all glass and gold leaf and calculated sophistication. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. A place where Chicago's wealthy came not just to eat, but to be seen eating, where business cards exchanged over appetizers were worth more than most people earned in a year, where the wine list started at $300 and climbed from there. The decor screamed luxury. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than cars, marble imported from Italy, artwork that belonged to museums. Every detail was designed to remind you that you were somewhere special, somewhere exclusive, somewhere that separated the haves from the have-nots with velvet ropes and impossible reservation lists. But beneath all that polish was something hollow. The conversations were performances. The laughter was strategic. The whole place felt like a stage where everyone was playing a role of a successful person, without stopping to ask what success actually meant. Deals were made, sure. Networks expanded. But genuine connection? Real human warmth? Those were as rare as a modest tip. The staff knew the game. They'd learned to read the room, to anticipate the egos, to smile through the condescension. They understood that many of these guests measured their worth by how many people they could look down on. And in a place like the Gilded Fork, service workers were often the bottom of that imaginary hierarchy. On this particular Friday evening in October, the dining room buzzed with its usual energy. Hedge fund managers celebrating quarterly returns. Real estate moguls discussing their latest acquisitions. Tech entrepreneurs who'd sold companies and now spent their time spending. The air was thick with expensive cologne, designer perfume, and the scent of people trying very hard to prove they'd made it. What none of them knew was that tonight, in this temple to material success, someone was about to remind them what they'd lost in the pursuit of having more. Elijah Brooks moved through the Gilded Fork's dining room with ease that came from somewhere deeper than training. At 26, he carried himself with a centeredness that some people never find in a lifetime. While his colleagues navigated the restaurant's demanding clientele with varying degrees of stress, Elijah remained calm. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something they didn't. His mother had raised him alone, working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. But poverty hadn't broken her spirit, and she'd made sure it wouldn't break his either. She'd taught him that a person's worth had nothing to do with their circumstances and everything to do with their character. That respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned through how you treated others, especially those who couldn't do anything for you in return. Elijah was putting himself through college, studying philosophy at a small university on the north side. His professors were impressed by his insights, the way he could connect ancient wisdom to modern life. Plato and Aristotle weren't just dead philosophers to him. They were teachers who understood something essential about human nature and the good life. He applied what he learned to everything he did. The way he served wasn't just about bringing food to tables. It was about honoring the work itself, finding dignity in service, treating every interaction as an opportunity to practice the values he believed in. His colleagues loved him because he never got flustered, never gossiped, never played the status games that consumed so many people in their industry. Regular guests requested his section not because he was the fastest or the most chatty, but because there was something about him that felt real in a place that often felt fake. He looked people in the eye. He listened when they spoke. He treated the junior analyst on an expense account the same way he treated the CEO, with genuine respect and attention. But Elijah had also seen enough at the Gilded Fork to understand that wealth often came with a peculiar kind of poverty. He'd watched people spend thousands of dollars on meals they barely tasted because they were too busy trying to impress their companions. He'd seen marriages held together by money and nothing else. He'd observed people who had everything except the one thing that actually mattered: peace with themselves. Tonight, all of his philosophy, all of his principles, all of his mother's lessons would be tested by a man who confused having everything with being something. Carson Fielding's entrance was designed to be noticed. At 42, he'd built a commercial real estate empire that had made him one of Chicago's wealthiest under 50. The money was real. The success was documented. The portfolio was impressive. But somewhere in the climb, he'd lost something essential, and he'd been trying to fill that void with more of everything that hadn't worked the first time. He arrived with his usual entourage. 5 associates who'd learned that agreeing with Carson was easier and more profitable than challenging him. They laughed at his jokes before he finished the punchlines. They nodded at his observations, even when they were clearly wrong. They'd all made the same calculation. Carson's approval meant opportunities, and opportunities meant money. And money meant they could afford their own tables at places like the Gilded Fork. The host seated them at a prominent table, center of the room, visible from every angle, exactly where Carson needed to be. He barely acknowledged her courtesy, already scanning the room to see who'd noticed his arrival. His satisfaction was visible when a few heads turned. This was what he came for: recognition, validation, the confirmation that he'd made it. But anyone paying attention could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The way his smile never quite reached them. The constant checking of his phone, as if he was waiting for a message that would finally make him feel whole. He'd achieved everything his younger self had dreamed of, and it hadn't been enough. So he kept accumulating. More properties, more deals, more zeros in accounts that already had too many. And when accumulation didn't fill the void, he tried elevation, making himself feel taller by making others feel smaller. It was a math that never worked, but Carson kept trying anyway. His companions ordered expensive cocktails. Carson ordered the most expensive bottle on the wine list without looking at the price, a gesture he'd practiced until it looked effortless. The conversation was all business, all strategy, all about the next acquisition. No one asked how anyone actually felt. No one mentioned families or dreams or fears or any of the things that make us human. They were successful men playing the role of successful men, and somewhere beneath the performance, they'd forgotten who they actually were. When Elijah approached the table, he saw all of this. He'd learned to read people quickly, and Carson Fielding was an open book written in expensive ink. Here was a man who had everything and had gained nothing, and he was about to take his emptiness out on someone else. Elijah stopped at the table's edge, his posture professional but relaxed. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Fork. My name is Elijah, and it'll be my pleasure to—" Carson's hand came up in a dismissive wave, his eyes still on his phone. "Just give us a minute." His tone made it clear the minute might be indefinite, that Elijah was expected to simply wait until acknowledged. Elijah stood patiently, unbothered. He'd learned long ago that other people's rudeness said nothing about him and everything about them. After a full minute of being ignored while Carson finished typing something on his phone, Carson finally looked up. His eyes swept over Elijah with that particular assessment wealthy people sometimes use on service workers, the kind that calculates worth based on occupation. "Do you even know how to serve someone like me?" Carson said it loud enough for neighboring tables to hear, with that tone that's meant to be a joke, but isn't really joking at all. His companions chuckled awkwardly. One of them glanced at Elijah apologetically before looking away. Carson continued, warming to his theme. "I mean, look at this place. Premium establishment. And they've got—" He gestured vaguely at Elijah. "Kids in uniforms taking orders. Do you even know the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy?" The question was designed to humiliate, to expose supposed ignorance, to establish hierarchy. Around the room, other diners shifted uncomfortably. Some pretended not to hear. Others watched with curiosity or discomfort to see how this would play out. "I work hard for my money," Carson went on, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his behavior. "I expect a certain level of service from people in your position. Not sure you can deliver that. Maybe get someone more experience." His table mates had stopped laughing. Even they could sense this had crossed a line. But Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't look hurt or angry or defensive. Instead, he looked at Carson with something that might have been compassion, which was somehow more unsettling than confrontation would have been. Comment below if you've ever watched someone confuse their bank account with their worth, because what happened next is a masterclass in a difference. Elijah let the silence stretch for a moment, not because he was searching for words, but because he wanted to choose them carefully. When he spoke, his voice was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the section. Respect isn't served on a silver platter, sir. It's earned by how we treat each other. The simple profundity of the statement landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Conversations at nearby tables paused. Carson's expression flickered between confusion and irritation. "Excuse me?" Elijah didn't step back or break eye contact. "I know the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy. I also know the difference between wealth and worth. And right now, sir, I'm looking at someone who is one but not the other." Carson's face began to redden. His companions froze. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. People in Elijah's position didn't talk back. They certainly didn't philosophize. But Elijah wasn't finished. His voice remained gentle, but his words carried weight. "You asked if I know how to serve someone like you. I do. I serve people every night. Kind people, rude people, generous people, empty people. And here's what I've learned. The ones who need to announce their importance are usually the ones who feel it least. You have everything money can buy, but you're still trying to purchase respect. And that's the one thing that will never be for sale." The room had gone completely silent now. Even servers had stopped moving. Everyone was watching this young waiter speak truth to power with a calmness that made his words even more devastating. "I serve food, sir. That's my job, and I do it well. But you—" Elijah paused, and in that pause was all the compassion in the world for a man who couldn't see his own poverty. "You're starving for something no menu can offer. And until you figure that out, every table you sit at, every person you dismiss, every dollar you spend will leave you just as empty as you were before you walked in." Carson's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around the room, people were nodding. A woman 2 tables over whispered, "Yes," under her breath. A businessman in a corner booth set down his fork and just stared, as if seeing something clearly for the first time. One of Carson's companions, a younger man who'd been looking increasingly uncomfortable, spoke up quietly. "He's right, Carson." Carson spun toward him. "What?" "He's right. We're all just performing, pretending. When was the last time any of us had a real conversation? When did we stop being people and start being portfolios?" The crack in the armor was all it took. Another member of the group nodded. Then another. Carson's carefully constructed world of enablers was fracturing in real time, and the man with a philosophy degree and a waiter's uniform had done it with nothing but truth. From the back of the dining room, a woman in an elegant navy dress began walking toward the scene. Margot Sinclair was 58, silver-haired, and had owned the Gilded Fork for 12 years. She'd built it into what it was: successful, prestigious, profitable. But she'd been feeling the hollowness of it for the past year, wondering when the place had shifted from celebrating good food and good company to simply celebrating wealth. She'd been watching the interaction from her usual spot near the kitchen, and something in Elijah's words had unlocked something in her. A decision she'd been avoiding, a truth she'd been ignoring. She reached the table and stood beside Elijah, not in front of him, but beside him, equal, supported. "Mr. Fielding," she said, her voice carrying the authority of ownership and age. "I'm Margot Sinclair. I own the Gilded Fork. And I need to tell you something about this young man you've been dismissing." Carson started to speak, but Margot continued. "Elijah Brooks was recently promoted to our senior service team. Not because he's been here the longest, and not because he's the fastest. He was promoted because he understands something that I'd almost forgotten myself. That true value has nothing to do with the price on a menu or the size of check." She turned to address not just Carson's table, but the entire dining room, her voice strong and clear. "I built this restaurant to be the best in Chicago, and for a while, I confused best with most expensive. I attracted clientele based on wealth, not character. I created a space where money mattered more than humanity. And that ends tonight. The room was transfixed. This was unprecedented. An owner publicly redefining her establishment. From this moment forward, the Gilded Fork stands for something different. We'll still serve exceptional food. We'll still maintain our standards of excellence. But we will no longer tolerate the treatment of our staff or anyone as lesser simply because they serve rather than sit. Character will matter more than capital. Respect will be required, not requested. She looked directly at Carson. You have a choice, Mr. Fielding. You can stay and learn something from a young man who understands what wealth really means. Or you can leave and find another place that will tolerate empty success and hollow behavior. But you cannot stay and continue as you were. Hit that like button if you believe that character matters more than bank accounts, because what happened next changed everything. Margot wasn't done. She addressed the room again. To all of our guests, we're honored to serve you, but service is not servitude. Courtesy is not cowardice, and wisdom can come from anyone, regardless of what they're wearing or where they're standing. If you can't treat our staff with the same respect you expect for yourself, then the Gilded Fork isn't the place for you anymore. Someone started clapping, then another person. Within seconds, half the dining room was applauding, not just for Elijah, but for the moment itself, for the stand, for the values, for the courage to choose principle over profit. Carson sat frozen, his face a mixture of emotions, embarrassment, anger, and perhaps, for just a moment, something that looked like recognition. His companions were already standing, some looking relieved, others thoughtful. Carson stood slowly. For a second, it looked like he might say something, apologize, argue, acknowledge. But instead, he simply nodded once and walked toward the exit, his entourage following. Before he reached the door, though, he paused and looked back at Elijah. Their eyes met across the dining room. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them. Then Carson was gone. The night Carson Fielding walked out of the Gilded Fork, something shifted in Chicago's elite dining scene. Word spread quickly through the social networks that connected the city's wealthy, not just about the confrontation, but about what had been said, about a waiter who'd spoken philosophical truth, about an owner who'd chosen values over revenue. The immediate impact on business was mixed. Some of the Gilded Fork's most demanding clients made reservations elsewhere, offended that they might be expected to treat staff with respect. But for everyone who left, 3 new reservations came in, from people who'd heard the story and wanted to support a restaurant that stood for something beyond just expensive food. Margot didn't back down. She held a staff meeting the next day and announced new policies. Any guest who treated staff disrespectfully would be asked to leave, regardless of how much money they spent. She instituted training not just in service, but in philosophy, bringing in Elijah to teach courses on dignity, respect, and finding meaning in work. The Gilded Fork would be luxurious, yes, but it would also be human. Elijah himself became something of a local legend. The story spread on social media, not as a viral spectacle, but as something deeper, a teaching moment that people genuinely wanted to share. News outlets picked it up. Philosophy podcasts discussed it. Business schools used it as a case study in values-based leadership. But Elijah remained grounded through it all. He continued his studies, continued working his shifts, continued treating every guest with the same calm respect regardless of how they treated him. When reporters asked for interviews, he'd give them, but always redirected the conversation from himself to the ideas. What does it mean to live well? What is success, really? How do we measure a life? He graduated with a philosophy degree and was offered management positions at multiple restaurants. He chose to stay at the Gilded Fork, but in a newly created role, Director of Culture and Values. He split his time between training staff and guest services, ensuring that every interaction reflected the restaurant's new ethos. The Gilded Fork's transformation became a model. Other establishments began examining their own cultures. Service industry workers across the city reported feeling emboldened to expect better treatment. The conversation shifted from the customer is always right to mutual respect is always required. As for Carson Fielding, his story took a quieter turn. He disappeared from the social scene for several months. Some said he was embarrassed. Others claimed he'd had some kind of breakdown. But when he reemerged, people noticed changes. He was quieter, less performative. He'd started attending community meetings, listening more than talking. Whether Elijah's words had truly reached him or whether the public humiliation had forced reflection, something had shifted. A year later, Carson made a donation to university where Elijah had studied, funding a scholarship for working students pursuing philosophy degrees. He never publicized it. Elijah only found out when the dean mentioned it in passing. Carson never reached out directly, never sought credit or forgiveness. But the gesture suggested that perhaps the lesson had landed after all. The Gilded Fork thrived in its new incarnation. The dining room still sparkled with crystal and candlelight. The food remained exceptional. The wine list was still impressive. But now there was something else too. Genuine warmth, real conversation, an atmosphere where people came not just to display their success, but to connect with others. Elijah's mother came to dinner one evening, and Margot seated her at the best table in the house, serving her personally. When she tried to pay, Margot refused. "Your son taught me what this restaurant should always have been about. Dinner is the least I can offer in return." The story became part of Chicago's cultural fabric, a reminder that wealth without wisdom is just accumulation, that success without character is just achievement, that we're all, in the end, just people trying to find meaning in a world that constantly tells us to look for it in the wrong places. Elijah continued his work, his studies, his quiet practice of living according to principles that money couldn't touch. He never became wealthy in the conventional sense. But every person whose life he touched, every staff member he trained, every guest who left the Gilded Fork thinking differently about what mattered, that was his real fortune. And it was a kind of wealth that could never be lost, stolen, or spent. The kind that grew the more you gave it away. The kind that Carson Fielding had been searching for in all the wrong places, until a young waiter in a dining room showed him where to look. Years later, when philosophy students studied the application of ancient wisdom to modern life, they'd sometimes discuss the Gilded Fork incident as a perfect example of Socratic dialogue in action, using questions and observations to lead someone to truth rather than imposing it. Elijah would laugh when he heard this. He'd just been speaking what he believed, practicing what he'd learned, living according to values his mother had taught him. But maybe that was the point. Real wisdom isn't complicated. It's not reserved for scholars or sages. It's available to anyone willing to live according to what they know is true, regardless of what the world tells them matters. It's choosing character over cash, substance over status, being over having. It's understanding that the person serving your table might know more about living well than you'll ever learn in a boardroom. And it's having the humility to learn from them when they teach. So what is wealth, really? That's the question Carson Fielding couldn't answer when he walked into the Gilded Fork that night. He had millions of dollars, multiple properties, business success that most people only dream about. But he was poor in every way that mattered. Elijah Brooks had a fraction of Carson's net worth. He worked a service job. He lived modestly. But he was rich in wisdom, in character, in the kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are and being satisfied with it. The real lesson isn't just about treating service workers with respect, though that's absolutely part of it. It's about understanding that we built an entire culture around measuring the wrong things. We count dollars, but not growth. We track wealth, but not wisdom. We chase success, but ignore significance. Every person reading this, watching this, has a choice to make. You can keep playing the game Carson was playing, accumulating things, seeking status, trying to feel important by making others feel small. Or you can do what Elijah did. Define your worth by your values, measure your success by your character, and understand that the richest people you'll ever meet might be wearing uniforms or working jobs that society tells you don't matter. Think about your own life. How do you treat people who serve you? The barista making your coffee, the person cleaning your office, the driver taking you where you need to go. Do you see them as people with their own dreams, struggles, wisdom? Or do you see them as functions, as services, as beneath you? And here's the harder question. What are you chasing? Is it wealth in the form of money and status? Or is it wealth in the form of character and meaning? Because you can have both, but only if you get the order right. Character first. Everything else follows. The gilded fork changed because Margot Sinclair had the courage to admit she'd been building the wrong thing. It became something better because she was willing to lose customers who valued the wrong things in order to gain customers who understood what mattered. That takes courage in a world that constantly tells us more is better and money is the measure. If this story resonated with you, if Elijah's wisdom spoke to something you've been feeling but couldn't articulate, then I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. We tell stories that challenge the narratives we've been sold about success and worth and meaning. We dig deeper than the surface. We ask the questions that matter. Share this video with someone who's chasing the wrong things, someone who's achieved success but lost themselves, someone who needs to hear that there's another way to measure a life. And drop a comment answering this question. What does real wealth mean to you? Not the answer you're supposed to give, but the truth. What would make you feel genuinely rich in your soul, not just your bank account? Because until we change how we define wealth, we'll keep producing Carson Fieldings, people with everything who have nothing, and we'll keep undervaluing Elijah Brookses, people with seemingly little who possess everything that matters. The choice is yours. The game is rigged, but you don't have to play. You can opt out. You can define success differently. You can choose wisdom over wealth, character over capital, being over having. And when you do, you'll discover what Elijah already knew, that the richest life isn't the one with the most stuff. It's the one lived according to values that money can't touch. It's the one where respect is given freely, where service is seen as noble, where every interaction is an opportunity to be more human. That's the real wealth. And it's been available to you all along. You just have to have the wisdom to see it and the courage to choose it. Choose wisely.